In your opinion, what are some of the practical and high value use cases that you see companies adopting today?
We've been using AI from the start, right? The notion of you have an image and now you want to adapt it, for example, to your product details page, right? And the product listing page. But in the product details page, it's landscape, but in the product listing page is a square. And in the past, you used to need a designer to, properly center and crop the image. But with AI, face detection and all sorts of, those DAs that were more heuristic than today, but trying to figure out, right, what's the important area of the image so that the result will be centered meant that we could now have someone just say, okay, here's my image. Now I wanted landscape for this part and square for that part, and that's it. It works. Fully automated, automation at scale.
Welcome to Discover Dialogues podcast, powered by TechDogs. The world of business and technology is evolving at breakneck speed. AI breakthroughs, digital transformation, and game-changing innovations are reshaping industries every day. On this show, we dive into the trends, ideas, and strategies driving the future. We're sitting down with industry leaders, innovators, and disruptors to bring you fresh insights, bold perspectives, and real conversations that matter. So plug in, tune in, and let's discover what's next.
Today on the show, we are joined by Tal Lev-Ami, co-founder and CTO at Cloudinary. After years in software engineering, system architecture, and academic research, Tal helped build Cloudinary to solve one of the internet's hardest problems, managing visual media at scale. With deep experience turning complex infrastructure into dependable platforms, he's now leading conversations around AI, visual workflows, and the future of reliable automation. In this episode, Tal explores how AI-powered visual workflows can scale only when reliability, architecture, and risk-aware automation come first. Let's dive in. Welcome to another episode of TechDogs Discover Dialogues. Tal, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Hi, Vikram. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Tal, you've spent years shaping how the world handles visual media. I think Cloudinary has become the invisible engine, if I was to say, powering millions of digital experiences. And your journey actually cuts across engineering, systems design, product building, and eventually shaping one of the most respected developer ecosystems in media tech. So before we actually dive into the world of AI, visuals, and the future that you're trying to build or help build, I want to kind of take a step back, rewind a little, and I think the best way to do that is to understand the path that led to it. So, would love for you to kind of walk us through your journey.
So, I had a computer, I don't know, I think I was in fourth grade, playing with it, writing simple basic programs, trying to understand what to do with this tool. Then I upgraded to Visual Basic and actually started building things also for money. In parallel, I started working on my bachelor's degree in computer science, parallel to to high school. I always loved computer science software. I find it fascinating. Um, then I did a master's. I I know my um, partners in Cloudinary for 30 years now. We met when we were 18. Um, and, my first real job was in a company that Nadav worked at. And then we joined together a company that Itai worked at. And we were working with each other for many years now. And at some point, I did programming. I did team lead. I was a team lead, a group lead. I was architect. payment system, cyber, all sorts of things. At some point, I decided I want to go back to the academy. I did a PhD in computer science in the world of program analysis. And then when I was done with that, I said, okay, now it's time for something different. Itai was also done with his role in the in a company that I never joined, and we wanted to do something together. We were looking for ideas. We had something around, using AI for um, the world of news aggregation, a problem that in my mind is still not properly solved. But we were building things, and we understood that to actually get something with traction, it'll take time. So we started. Basically, we created a consultancy, and started working with entrepreneurs. Our claim to fame was to take an entrepreneur with an idea and a budget, but no technical skills, and work with them to getting the first working product to the market, so that they'll see if it makes sense or not. And we did this multiple times with various sizes of companies. And then we actually, Nadav also joined us and worked with us on the same, in the same company. And from that work, Nadav came with the idea, with the observation that this world of media, of images, video is uh, complex. The developers need to work hard to solve these problems, and sometimes, two simple lines in the spec are actually tons of work, and the tooling around this are not good enough. And we said, okay, interesting. Let's try to build this. And the first customers of Cloudinary were actually the customers of the consultancy, where we integrated it, and it worked well. And we thought it's making progress. So we did a soft launch, started to see if it's going to catch. Uh, People like that. They started to speak to their friends about it, and things escalated from there, as they say. Uh, so for me, software development, and AI, and architecting things and building things, that's my passion from forever now.
And looking back, do you think there was a lesson, maybe perhaps from your early engineering years, that still perhaps guides how you build today?
I think that one of our key observations while we were working with entrepreneurs to build their first working product is the criticality of the 80/20 mindset. And if you look, they had huge specs that did a ton of things, and then they got a quote of how much it'll cost them to build it. They said, no, 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 you misunderstood. So we would work with them on figuring out what's the critical aspect of it. What's the crux of the problem that you're trying to solve? What are you actually trying to prove right now, and build the right part of it. And it was much, much smaller always. And this process of understanding what's important and doing the 80/20 is something I very much believe in today.
And I think this kind of gives me, a sense of perhaps how each chapter of your professional journey prepared you for the whole, Cloudinary story. And I think that foundation is actually much more relevant today, because I think media, and all sorts of media actually, is going through one of the biggest transformations that we've seen, right? So I mean, I think every digital touch point is becoming visual first. uh, Product pages, you talk entertainment, you talk UGC, you talk ads, you talk social media platforms. And I think in the last couple of years, AI has kind of accelerated this shift at a pace I don't think anybody expected. and you sit at the center of this evolution. I think AI has actually moved from those playful experimentations to now maybe mission critical workflows. There's obviously generative fields, object removals, and smart cropping, which are mainstream now. Um, in your opinion, what are some of the practical and high value use cases that you see companies adopting today?
So the world of AI is huge and it's everywhere. So I'll try to focus on my little corner of the world, which is visual media, which is huge and in itself. Uh, so look, we've been using AI from the start, right? The notion of you have an image and now you want to adapt it, for example, to your product details page, right? And the product listing page. But in the product details page, it's landscape, but in the product listing page is a square. Um, in the past, you used to need a designer to properly center and crop the image. But with AI, face detection and all sorts of those days that were more heuristic than today, but trying to figure out, right, what's the important area of the image so that the result will be centered meant that we could now have someone just say, okay, here's my image. Now I wanted landscape for this part and square for that part. And that's it. It works. Fully automated, automation at scale. Um, so this notion of automation at scale, this notion of how can we take the burden of the work that the team needs to do and help them be focused in, what's differentiated for them is something that we're trying to do from the start. And we also have a keen um, understanding of the importance of the reliability of what you're trying to do to the customer. So I think one of the main blockers today for more adoption around generative AI around visual media is the fact that you never know what you're actually going to get. And in many, many cases, it'll be amazing. And then some cases, it'll be just catastrophic. And you can't have that if you want to do, especially if you want to do automation scale. So finding the right use cases and finding the guardrails and the work processes that allows you to work effectively and in scale on one hand, and still be safe and trust the results. On the other hand, that's the crux of it. So, for example, talked about Gen Fill. What is Gen Fill? It actually means, let's say I have this landscape image, and now I want a square, but instead of cropping, I want to extend the image, right? So in the past, it would have been impossible. It doesn't work unless it's very, very regular background, such as full white or something like that. It just doesn't work. Today, with generative AI, you can actually imagine what happens outside of the region that you see, and it actually works quite well. But even there, a much simpler use case than the general use case. First iterations, when we started exploring this type of algorithms, for example, you would we would have a model. They were standing next to a wall, and then you were zooming out, expanding, and there was some dark figure standing next to her because that's what the AI imagined. You can't have
Yeah,
that. A brand
yeah,
cannot have this type of
absolutely,
image on their
absolutely.
website.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
impossible.
Hmm.
So the notion of what use case can you control enough so that it's trustworthy and a brand can use it versus what still needs some sort of human in the loop and more interactive work is something that is super critical to understand to give value to our customers.
Hmm. And I want to double click on something that you talked about, right? Because I've seen this over the last year and a half. When we were implementing AI throughout the business, and maybe we can probably talk a little bit more about from a brand angle as well. The word that you used was reliability. Okay, from a brand perspective, I think that's the biggest thing, right? So the tool that I'm using should be able to give me the same output day in day out. Okay, and then there is the other aspect of it, right? So which is accuracy and creativity. Okay, now when you're looking at brands, especially in marketing functions, who will or use a lot more of this, the asks are going to be too different. They're going to, or rather, they're going to be actually hand in hand. So they want reliability slash accuracy, and at the same time they want creativity, and maybe creativity with reliability. How does that fit in all of this?
It's a great question because first of all, there every use case is different. We speak about AI, right? But there are many different use cases here. There are also different personas. So we started with a tool that was basically for developers. And developers, in some sense, they don't want creativity, right, in runtime. They want to be creative in development time, but in runtime, they want full reliability. They don't want creativity. Creativity is, phone calls in the middle of the night. Um, on the other hand, we now have a product, a digital asset management product that's for marketeers. Marketeers do want creativity, but marketeers are usually more open to more interactive work around the assets that they're building and an ability to, go through the multiple results and pick the result that makes sense for that particular case that they're doing, and so on. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to build the right tools to the right people. And for the developers, you want things, for example, as I said, background, you do background fill. We were working very hard to make the AI as least creative as possible, right? We don't want it creative. We want a wall. We don't want a person that makes sense next to that person. No, no, no. We used to have problems of you would put a piece of food, right, on a table, and then you would zoom out and more pieces of food would show up on the table because it makes sense, right? But that's not what you want in that case, right? So um, finding the right level and the right it's basically about looking at it from the perspective of the end user, trying to understand what they need, right? And trying to find the right solution for them. And we have different workflows and different optimizations for different use cases.
And all powerful examples there, right? Because I think they are highlighting something important. I think the magic of AI only works when you have the right context, and the right understanding of what it should be doing. And from what I hear, you've always been very clear about this as well, and purely from an architecture point, perhaps. You've often said that architecture decides whether AI succeeds or collapses or fails. Uh, what are what are some of the architecture principles that matter the most for teams that are building AI powered visual products today?
So I think the main thing that they need to understand is um, the the use case that they're trying to build and the risk associated with it. So, and when I say risk, there are various angles to um, what is part of a risk of a use case. For example, um, is what you're trying to do right now is going to be in the center of your front page, or is it some catalog item number million and a half that only few people will see, right? Are you a small startup that is willing to take risk, or are you a brand with that really needs to keep their their brand on point, and every little mistake will be highlighted in multiple social media posts, right, all around the world. How what's the probability of a failure for that particular use case, right? But more even than what the probability of a failure is, how does failure look like? So if we're talking about, for example, background removal, then failure means probably that I didn't remove part of the background. Okay, doesn't look great, but it's not so bad. If we're talking about Gen Fill, as I said, if it's, the wall doesn't is a little crooked, not so bad. If a person appears, very bad. And the more creativity, as you said, is part of that use case, the more dangerous, the more risk there is that the end result will be hurting your brand. And nuances can be, sometimes nuances are important. So, for example, if you're marketing to a country uh, that is more conservative, then the notion of an image that is let's say shows more skin might be a big deal for you, right? So that's a particular risk that you need to take into account. So you take all these, right, all this metrics of risks, and then you understand what do you need to do. Do you need to is this, it's not going to work, let's just do it later with AI on one hand, or on the other hand, let's go automation at scale. If somebody will complain, we probably want an override mechanism to solve that, but otherwise it's fine. And then you have the in between, right? You have the in between that is, let me just test it well and maybe sample it once in a while to see that it's doing a good job. And it could be no. It's interactive. I want to see the results, see it with AI, approve, fix, right, reject, and try again. And only then am I happy with somebody else seeing the result. So this notion of what's the risk that is inherent and what's your risk tolerance really dictates the what type of workflow you're building for that use case, and they can be very different from each other. So I think that's a key aspect to look at when thinking about AI.
And maybe that perhaps then naturally brings me to something that a lot of businesses uh, think about, and that's got to do more with the architecture that goes underneath all of this. uh, I think businesses talk about mark a lot. They're talking about microservices, API first, cloud native, headless. um, but that's, in my opinion, the academic version. And the real world implementations of those perhaps are very different. So I think, uh, what, in your opinion, perhaps, how should one, take this mark oriented approach, uh, and change what's perhaps possible with the visual AI today?
I think that the way that the world works right now is that it moves very fast, and the brands need to adapt really quickly. So you really need a tool set that will allow you to do that. And for that, you need the best of breed, right? In each of the things that you're trying to build, you don't want to be stuck with some huge mammoth of a tool that you're that's it. What it does, and everything else, you're in trouble. But you want something that's more flexible, and it will allow you to pick and choose the best for each of the things that you're trying to do, and it will allow you to replace whatever is not moving fast enough to your liking. Um, so this notion of uh, multiple services talking to each other, each doing what they're really good at, and playing well together is something that's very powerful in a fast changing world. And today, with AI, actually integrating between tools is easier than ever before. So it creates a very flexible organization for architecture, for moving forward quickly, and for adapting to whatever comes your way, especially in these crazy days.
But don't you think it's a little different, because in the last year, uh, alone, maybe there are so many platforms that have emerged that are now allowing maybe the non-developers to build visual experiences as well, right? Uh, I think AI democratized a lot of things. One of them was coding, the other was content creation and visuals and media. Okay, and experiences with the help of LLMs. Uh, I mean, I think the question I'm trying to perhaps lean in towards is, what gap do you think this new model is going to solve in the industry?
So a few things. One, there is a huge difference between um, experimenting and demoing than production workflows, right? And it's true from the difference between an academic paper and something that works in production, and it's true also with here I did a few things by my own versus I need day in and day out to create media that is high quality and makes sense. And I think that in many cases um, people get look at all this shiny new things and don't think about what it actually means to get this into production workflow, and it's something that is important to look at. Also, media is not just about the creation. It's also about how do I manage this? How do I store this? How do I make sure that nobody else accesses it? How do I find the right piece of media after I created it? How do I deliver it? How do I optimize it? A lot of things that are, I don't want to say mundane because they're critical, but they're not these shiny new things. And you need all of it. You need your pipeline to be strong and resilient across the whole chain, right? And for that, you need to know what you're doing. And in many cases, what you see people trying to build things on their own. It works well in the beginning, and then when things scale and become more complicated, it starts breaking really quickly, and then okay, now I need the professionals, right? Now I need uh, the 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 robust, battle tested tools to do this properly. So I think we'll see a lot of uh, sources of media from various angles. Some of them more ad hoc, and some of them more, sustained. And you still need this infrastructure of how do you handle media properly in your organization, from what's your single source of truth, how do you find things there, how do you orchestrate the various phases of the process, how do you make sure that whatever comes is adapted to whatever device is needed, or whatever social network this goes to. How do you make sure it's optimized so that it can be delivered quickly to the end user? All of these concerns need to be addressed.
And talking about shiny new objects, um, the one that's making the rounds of late is obviously agentic systems and agentic AI. Do you think that they will shape visual experiences or media workflows in the next few years?
I call it build mode and run mode, right? When you build things, uh, some sort of agentic interactive copilot that can be short running, it can be long running. That's not the point right now. Um, is super valuable. And I've been playing in many different levels of this. It can be around media creation, media manipulation. It can be around how do you organize your things in your media library, right? Do I tag things? It can be what are the insights that I have about how my images are actually used. It can be many different levels, and it can be around the more builder experience. I want to build something, right? Build a workflow, and there the agentic smartness is amazing, and can bring you a lot of value. But actually, in most cases, when, let's say, what you're building is not ad hoc, is something that you want to work over time, in run mode, you don't want the what you're building to be too smart. It's not good for it, right? You want it to be as reliable as possible, as consistent as possible. So, in some sense, you want to build something, make sure that it works, be happy with it, and then being able to execute it over and over again without having it move too much in real time, right? In runtime, because you what you don't want is to reach a point where the you did excellent testing of all the different use cases that you could think about, and then somebody puts a picture of a dog instead of a person, and you get a completely horrible result because you never thought that. Why would somebody put a picture of a dog there, right? So I think that we will be using agents a lot to help people be more productive, and their potential there is huge. I think that this notion of something completely autonomous that is, as reliable as a human is something that we're still further along.
And with all of this evolution that's happening in the space, I think one of the things that has remained constant is the developers. Now, Cloudinary has one of the strongest developer ecosystems in media tech, which is actually no small achievement, to be honest. And given the fact that we are in a period where developer ecosystems will scale, if the right capabilities are unlocked through AI. I mean, what are some of the lessons that perhaps you or anybody could take away? When you're trying to drive a developer adoption at scale, with the whole AI piece.
So I think that one of our jobs as Cloudinary is to make the developers' lives as easy as possible, right? So we're trying to build the right. We have MCPs in front of all our major APIs. We have our documentation is now LLM friendly, so it'll be easier for the LLM to ingest. We have a visual. Um, VS Code plugin to help developers using Cloudinary to be more successful. We're trying to be there where the developer is and trying to make their lives possible. We have SDKs across many different languages and front end platforms, and um, I think that the the developers will become more designers of software than coders, pure coders, right? Because with the coding assistants, you can basically give them a lot of the actual coding work and be more focused on what you're trying to build, how you're building it, how do you make sure that the architecture is correct, that things work well together. And I think that part of the important aspect that the developer will need to understand is what is mine, what do I need to build, and what I need to, bring the right tool, third-party tool to build properly. And this type of architecture work, I think, will become a lot of what the developers are actually doing around that. I find myself saying to multiple people, it used to be that the most critical thing was to know how to do something. But now it becomes more critical to know what you want to do and how do you know that what you got is what you wanted. So this whole shift of, what your focus is now very different. And, some people say there will be no more developers. No, I think there'll be a lot more developers. But what it is to be a developer is shifting, is evolving as it evolved. My father used to use punch cards to code, right? Uh, I've it's completely different than how I was developing when I started developing, and it's completely different from how people starting to develop now are doing it, or how I am doing it when I'm doing it today. Things evolve. That's life. But this notion of people that are there to build things, to understand how things interact, what are the consequences of the decisions, where things would break, and what you want to do with them, all these things, that's a skill set that I think we will just need more and more of.
And I think that's a perfect bridge into something more human, because I think that's what we are focusing on, because technology is evolving fast, and the mindset to build is actually what is driving this transformation. And if you look at it, the whole visual media space has perhaps gone from a design function to a strategic lever for businesses. And like we spoke about it earlier, he has kind of amplified that shift. And now leaders like myself, and many others out there, are now thinking, how do I, or rather, have to start rethinking, how do I build my experiences? How do I build a team? How do I build a culture? Um, and what would your advice be to people, or leaders, or brands actually, who are trying to build that visual first AI powered experiences?
It's a great question. I think that one of the things that's important to understand is what can the AI do? And for that, you have to play with the tools. You have to play with them yourself. You know, uh, you have to try to do things. You have to try to do crazy things that you didn't think are possible and see what happens. And it's true in, if you're a designer, and it's true if you're, you're a developer, and it's true if you're a HR person. It's true for every one of us. The capabilities of AI are not a line. They're something very fuzzy, uh, and with unclear edges. So this feeling of what works and what doesn't work, what's possible and not possible, is something that you really need to have to be able to make the right decisions about how you want to work, what can change. And sometimes it's hard for someone that's too deep inside their day-to-day work to actually take the distance and try to see, okay, maybe I can do something completely different. So sometimes it's your job to figure it out for them, and see if you can think about things differently than. But that's how we always did things around here, right? uh, this is a these are great times to try to challenge that perspective.
I think a lot of times, brands end up optimizing rather than reinventing. And I think right now, like you said, maybe perhaps, they have to go to those fringe areas and figure out what is that they could do in terms of reinvention, rather trying to optimize, if I have it correct. And well, I mean, I think the most logical question then perhaps would be to ask, when brands are using, or AI, and they're creating these AI driven visual experiences, should they also measure it differently from how perhaps traditional visual experiences were being developed?
Look, at the end of the day, everybody has their KPI. For most companies, it's around money, but the money can be how many ads I'm selling, how many eyeballs I have. It could be how many products I'm selling. It can be different things. Uh, so at the end of the day, that's it. That's the most important thing in your, that you need to measure. But one thing that you need to understand is that you need to take into account risk, right? So everything is great, but once in a while I have something terrible. What does it mean? How bad is it? You need to think about it, and you need to measure how often it happens, right? If you do want to take the risk around it. When you Another aspect is from the perspective of the customer. What do they actually need in that case, right? So, for example, one of the things that we're seeing is that if a person is too, it looks too good, too, not in terms of beautiful, but in terms of, there are too many details there. It just looks so good. It's too perfect. Okay, then it's hard for you to feel it's authentic, right? It looks too good, too perfect. So it's not that you can optimize towards looking better, 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 better. That's the best possible look. Okay, now I'm good. You have to keep looking back as to how your audience actually perceives that. And one of the things that I think we'll see is, um, if all the marketing will also be so perfect and so nice and lovely, we'll start seeing the pendulum go to the other side, and we'll see more user-generated content with authentic experiences, right? And so I think that understanding the user perspective around it, and understanding there is AI fatigue that can happen, understanding, you know. Um, uh, what's the message that you're actually trying to convey is something that's it's very important.
I mean, almost every business leader out there wants to start. They don't know where to begin. There are so many options now, right? So there was automated first. Then came generative. Now there's agentic. Um, what's like your biggest advice to them on where to start and where not to start?
I'm a strong believer in crawl, walk, run. So I would start with something that's simple and makes sense to you, and you can play with it yourself. Try to see that you're happy with the results. Try to see that the team understand what's happening here, and understand the landscape of what is possible right now. Then you can say, okay, now I'm working too hard in getting there. What can I do more automatically around this? How can I look at what my people are spending time on, replace some of these things with more automated things? And then, you can look at um, something that's even more independent, right? More agentic about it. But as I said, I feel that there is a lot of value for agentic as a productivity booster versus something that's completely rogue, right? Completely independent in the world.
No, I think that's a important perspective because I think a lot of organizations today are still figuring out their AI maturity. Uh, because, like you said, and I think this has been the central theme of the whole AI implementation across the globe. And I was fortunate to have some interesting conversations, right? So there is so much that is happening on the demos, to the actual implementation, and I think reliability is where it, and I think that's the key takeaway that I'm going to take away for myself, is that reliability is the piece where most of these AIs are still, implementations are still in the box, and they're saying, okay, if they are reliable enough, then we'll put them. If not, they're just going to stay in the box for a while. But great. I think it's been perfect so far, because you've kind of really set the tone, and given us a whole lot of insights in terms of your philosophy, and what you guys are trying to do at Cloudinary. Uh, you know, and now that we've covered that serious part, I want to end on a slightly more lighter note. I want to switch gears, have a little bit of fun, especially for our listeners who enjoy this specific segment. And that's our quick rapid fire round. Short questions, instinctive answers, whatever comes to first. Let me know when you're ready, and then we just go for it.
One sec. Let's go.
Okay. If you had one superpower for a day, what would you pick?
Uh, Being able to go back in time
On that note, if that was a superpower, which point period in time would you go back to?
to the beginning of the same day. I love Groundhog Day. It's one of my favorite
Oh,
movies.
nice, 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 fantastic, good answer, great answer, actually. Okay, one tech gadget you can't live without outside of work.
Tech gadgets. I have my phone, and it's basically a supercomputer that is with me at all times. I remember, when I was younger, you were talking about these devices, these huge supercomputers, right? You see in the movies, and this thing is much stronger than all of them together ever, right? So for me, this is still a wonder that I love.
What's the most unusual food that you tried and actually enjoyed?
I don't remember the name, but when I was in Ecuador, I ate a larva for some insect. It was a huge larva thing.
I think I'm just going to
Actually
put on a
tasted good,
disclaimer for this answer.
it was surprising.
Okay. What's your go-to karaoke song, even if you don't admit it?
I'm a terrible singer. My kids hate it when I sing, but it's Bohemian Rhapsody. That's
Oh,
my
nice.
all-time
Lovely.
favorite.
Lovely. Fantastic. What's that one small daily habit that makes your day better?
I do Tai Chi. That's my way to relax. So I try to find time every day to do something. Some exercise, something to calm the mind with everything that's going on.
What's your go-to midnight snack?
So it's actually labane, which is actually a type of salty uh, cream cheese that I eat with pretzels or something similar. It's nice and salty. It hits a spot.
Okay. What would your ideal do nothing day look like?
Do I have to do nothing? I don't like doing
Yes.
nothing.
So you have to do something, but well, let's say not work in that case.
So I think start with morning exercise. I like to do that, and then I'll probably sit and at some place with a beautiful view and read a book. Then maybe do a little bit of Tai Chi against that lovely view. Have a great meal, and then rinse and repeat for the rest of the day. What else do you need?
If your friends at Cloudinary were to pick up a theme song for you, what would they choose?
Theme song. Wow, that's a hard one.
You can pick it for yourself as well. So imagine you're walking into the Cloudinary office and that theme song is playing. Which one would it be?
I don't know. That's a hard one. I have done.
Perhaps you should go
I
with
don't have an
We
answer
Will
for
Rock
this
You.
one. We will rock you. Yeah. It'll probably, actually, I find myself listening these days mostly to music without lyrics. It can be classical music, but it can also be, progressive metal with no lyrics. So it will probably be a theme songs with no lyric.
Okay, perfect. Okay. One last one before we let you go. Uh, if you could have a personal chef, what cuisine would you want them to cook for you every day? Or what
Sushi.
dish? Let's make it a dish. What dish would
No,
you want
sushi,
them?
sushi. I love
Sushi?
sushi.
Oh, absolutely. Great
I
fan.
adore sushi, and when a chef makes it, I
Then
can
it's going to be
live
top
on
notch.
it.
Fantastic, Tal. This was so much fun. It's been a real pleasure with having you on the show today. Thank you for joining us once again and sharing your insights. Any parting words?
Thank you, Vikram. I think we live in amazing times, and it's an amazing time to be somebody creative and that experiments with things. And I encourage everybody to do that.
All right. Thank you, Tal, once again. Really appreciate this.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe on YouTube, Instagram, or your favorite podcast app. Catch past episodes and more at techdogs.com. See you next time.